Now, you think we are just the warm-up for the Scott extravaganza in a moment with Cara. And if you like, we can come up with some very controversial tech forecasts for the next year. But no, this is a really well-connected group of people to talk about something that's really important. Now, the starting point for this conversation was, what's tech's responsibility? And it kind of evolved into thinking about the key subject that's now affecting every big organization, that's motivating talent to change its plans, and that's how we deal with the climate emergency. So we're going to talk about the responsibility and the opportunity for the tech sector in confronting the climate emergency. And we've got three people here with great insights, but from very different perspectives. Philipp Justus of Google has a very big job, runs Central Europe for Google. And we're going to talk a bit about how inside a very big, increasingly mature company, you're thinking about tech's ability to make not just the company, but consumer behavior more sustainable. And then Erin Beilharz is at the sharp end, because you are working with Lufthansa to take them towards net zero. So Erin represents the Lufthansa Group's CleanTech Hub, and you're doing everything from developing new, more sustainable aviation fuels, synthetic fuels, UAVs, hybrid, hydrogen electric engines. And we're going to talk a bit about how inside a fairly conservative industry, you're helping bring the transition. And then from the startups rather than the corporate side, Christophe Maire is investing in radical innovation through Atlantic Labs and also a specialist food fund, Foodlabs. And I think, Christophe, you are seeing the opportunities, the startups moving very quickly, maybe quicker than some of the corporates can do. But I want to kick off with how the conversation around sustainability inside big organizations such as Lufthansa and Google are changing. And Philipp, you can no longer be an information business, an advertising business, because there's new pressures, partly from regulators, partly from customers and partners, but partly from your own staff to be more carbon accountable. How do you think about this inside Google?
So I think for sure we're seeing in our company, and probably in your companies as well, that we as employees, the next generation of employees that are coming into our companies, want companies to lead on everything sustainability. That's for sure a motivation for people to go into business, and that's their expectation of how the business would behave. So at Google, we've been on this sustainability and climate journey for quite some time. In 2007, we started becoming carbon neutral by offsetting the energy usage that we had. And that was early, I would say. That was 15 years ago, 16 years ago. But over the last years, we've realized that it's probably not good enough to offset carbon that we emit as a company, but we want to get to a stage where we actually no longer emit carbon. So we've set ourselves a goal to become carbon-free by 2030 in all of our operations and data centers. And frankly, that's a pretty wild and lofty objective, because it means that 365 days of the year, 24 hours, we want all of our data centers to be running on carbon-free energy. We're on a good path to get there, but there's a lot that we need to figure out. And I think it's goals like that that excite employees. It's when I speak to my colleagues, they are excited and inspired by the fact that we have this goal, sort of we're a couple of years into the journey, have 7 years to go, and there's a lot of innovation that needs to happen. But it's those kind of moonshot ambitions that I think inspire people.
So I can understand how you can use wind-generated electricity to help run a server, but there's areas of your very big organization that can't simply become carbon neutral by changing how you source energy. So what else are you doing inside the business to whether it's offset or to change the materials you're using to build. How are you thinking about concrete ways to become carbon neutral?
Sure. So one of the ways we want to get there is by being much more effective with the energy that we use. And you can think about that in the amount of compute capacity we get for a certain amount of electricity that we use. And so over the last 5 years, that amount has actually increased by a factor of 5. So we get 5 times the compute capacity for the electricity that we use, which is massive. And so we can drive that by being much smarter in our data centers. For example, in cooling. Cooling is something that takes up a lot of energy, key contributor to energy consumption. And we've used basically AI-based models to help us figure out data center by data center and server by server, where do we need to do how much cooling? Where do we need to turn down or up the cooling? Now that sounds very mundane, but the impact is very big, as you can see, by a 5x increase over that period of time. I think the other way we're thinking about our responsibility is externally and in our user-facing products. So one of the things we notice is that people turn to Google for answers for how to save energy. We saw it in Germany last year in 2022 in the summer, that searches for how to save energy increased 5-fold because people were concerned about their energy bills. So we want to be there with answers that help people make good choices, right? That's our role as a search engine provider. We try to do this, for example, in flight search. So when you go into Google Flight Search and look for how to get from Munich, I don't know, to New York, you'll see the airline options and choices ranked by CO2 emissions in addition to price and in addition to flight times. And so I think...
So you're nudging us, you're trying to get us to think about the CO2 cost of a particular flight.
We're providing more information and you can decide what you want to do with that information.
Yeah, the nudge is interesting. I see that when I now use Google Maps to drive somewhere, you suggest a more fuel-efficient route.
Right, that's a great example as well, because of course for years we've had different transportation options in Google Maps, whether it is, you go by car, you go by flight, you go by train, and train is a very eco-friendly option. But if you're going to use your car, wouldn't it be great to also know what the most eco-friendly route is instead of just the fastest? And it makes a massive difference. So we've introduced that in a number of countries. It takes into account things like the number of traffic lights that you might encounter. Or in Germany, whether you would be driving on a high-speed Autobahn versus Landstraße, so kind of smaller roads with lower speeds, which also makes a massive difference. So we think tech responsibility is also in the products we provide to our users, in the choices that we can all make on a daily basis when we use any service, really.
And you are, to a large extent, an AI company as well. And you have units inside Alphabet, such as DeepMind, that are using deep learning, artificial intelligence at its super ambitious level to try, among other things, minimize energy expenditure. How do you see the DeepMind part of Alphabet fitting into the rest of the company?
So DeepMind is a super interesting part of Alphabet, and I think Demis has been on stage here a couple of years ago and talked about the journey of DeepMind. When you zoom back sort of 7-8 years ago, DeepMind developed this tool that could play Go better than any human being, right? AlphaGo was one of their first breakthroughs. And then people asked the question, well, why would you care about something like that? What is the purpose of that? And the same types of learning algorithms have been now applied to many more real-world problems, like the energy cooling example I provided to you is actually powered by DeepMind algorithms. So DeepMind powers that logic in our data centers that helps us figure out what the right cooling is. But I think probably the most breathtaking AI breakthrough from DeepMind came last year with AlphaFold, which is an algorithm that predicts the shape of proteins based on the components and the sequence in the protein. And that again sounds like it's a very specialized niche topic, but it really isn't, because the 3D shape of a protein influences a lot of things that are highly relevant for vaccine research, for research on diseases. And so I think to have the ability to now forecast millions of proteins with a model like this is actually very powerful. That to me shows the potential that we have with AI.
And I think DeepMind open sourced this massive body of research,
Indeed,
which potentially, as well as helping with drug development, can help develop new materials that help towards that carbon neutrality. One last question about AI. Everybody's getting very excited about generative AI. There's another big tech company called Microsoft that seems to be putting a lot of money into one of these companies using generative AI, ChatGPT. There is a suggestion that AI-based search could be the new demand for people seeking information through web browsers. But that's going to use massive amounts of computing power, which again is going to consume massive amounts of energy. Is generative AI something we should get excited about or a bit cautious about?
The answer, as in any good question, is probably both. I think the excitement comes from the opportunity, in the case of search, to make search results that much more relevant for us as users. And by the way, generative AI is already powering a lot of Google search results. Search quality ranking has to do with language models that we have trained to provide better search results to users. So there's many examples like that. I would give another one in Google Translate. That's not search, but translate. The way we translate into hundreds of languages is driven by language models that weren't around 5 years ago, but that are making a step change today. So the second part of your question, doesn't that consume a lot more energy, is one we'll have to figure out as an industry. How can we make these models not only more powerful, but also less energy consuming? How can we scale them such that they in fact become a net positive and are not a net addition to let's say, the CO2 footprint?
Erin, you're in a very different kind of business, a business that is more safety conscious than most, that doesn't like big radical changes because we want aviation that we can rely on, that works. And the life of an aircraft may be 3 decades. How do you think inside Lufthansa about the tension between keeping things as they have been, keeping things predictable and safe, and yet this imperative to move super quickly into decarbonizing?
So let me correct you here. I think that Lufthansa is quite excited about renewing and changing. We have the aircraft that you know the shape of it, but the aircraft that you might know is different than yesterday's. It looks the same, but under the hood, let's say, is completely different. The current aircraft that we have now available on the market are burning up to 30% less fuel, making 30% less emissions. This is also an enormous cost driver for us. So we are very driven and ambitious with regards to renewing this fleet. Obviously, this comes with its own complications and difficulties. From, if you can imagine, buying, we said we're buying up to 200 and introducing up to 200 new aircraft, short, medium, long haul, by 2030 to hit our ambitious climate goals, which are the same as yours, and the same, I think, as most people's, 50% by 2030, and getting net zero by 2050. This, for an aviation industry, is very, very difficult. Even if we just buy an off-the-rack aircraft, there's no such thing. Everything needs to be ordered separately with regards to all of the things that you experience inside. We will have an aircraft delivered every 2 weeks if this comes to plan, and then the aircraft manufacturer has to deliver them. We have to finance it, we have to roll them in, choose what's inside. So even just that, which is kind of easy, it represents a huge amount of work and a huge amount of also ambition to change.
But and yet, the very act of flying has gathered some kind of social reluctancy lately. Greta helped popularize a Swedish word, flygskam, which means flight shame. So how does an airline industry cope when, however much you're modernizing the aircraft, there is still a perception that taking an aeroplane is increasingly irresponsible in a climate emergency?
I think it depends on why you need to take an aircraft. There's probably certain acts of flying which may be superfluous, but there's also acts of flying every day which are absolutely necessary. Our corporate slogan is connecting people, cultures, and economies in a sustainable way. And it is a slogan, but beyond that, if you kind of emotionalize this and think about what flying means to you, or what flying means to me as a Canadian who lives in Germany, it means that I get to see family and friends who live in other parts of the world. And not flying prohibits me from doing that. I think when you talk about flying and what it enables and what it prevents, it is a very necessary part of our modern society in terms of bringing necessary equipment to areas that's needed, also, you know, disaster areas, whatever.
But you're under pressure to change and to change quickly. So in the CleanTech Hub at Lufthansa Group, what concrete initiatives are you pursuing that can take you towards net zero?
So in addition to new aircraft, which are the ones that we all know about, we also look into new types of propulsion. You mentioned hydrogen before. Is electric going to be a viable solution? And this is what we can change with regards to the fleet. Another huge area that we need to put all of our effort onto is changing from fossil fuels into sustainable aviation fuels, where we are also active engaging with startups and molecules are helping as well with regards to understanding, engaging with startups to help to scale them up to serve our industry, because there's a lot that they don't know. Even if they nail the molecules, we still have to come into an entire new ecosystem and build it up. And then also digital initiatives to shave off certain percentages to make us more efficient. We have done, about a year and a half ago, with Google together, a program called OPS-D, so a product which is allowing us over the entire course of our fleet to, when in the case of an irregularity or a cancellation or a snowstorm or some kind of activity, to actually see the entire fleet and figure out what is going to be the most efficient decision to be made with 100,000 different options over the entire fleet. It used to be that you would create a human decision which would help this specific aircraft, which needs to have a decision. And this kind of connecting of data and enabling these decisions is essentially going to create a huge amount of sustainability through just efficiency, but as well as cost saving.
But it's also a cultural challenge inside a well-established business like Lufthansa. Are there tensions between these newer initiatives and the older part of the group?
I think there are tensions with regards to where the focus is. The focus is on sustainability, but we are also in a very volatile industry. So in practical terms, when we have the COVID crisis, which means that all of our employees are then sponsored by state and have to get furloughed or work from home or Kurzarbeit, this kind of no working for a while. And then we have huge amounts of staff losses, and then we have operation problems, and then we have the Ukraine war with fuel delivery problems, and we just have so many other kind of emergencies in our industry, unfortunately, which kind of take potentially certain attention away from the building of new sustainability-driven innovations. And I think that the innovation departments are different ones, but the top management always is getting distracted in a way by emergencies.
You have the benefit, Christophe, of not having a legacy business to make carbon neutral. Instead, you are investing in radical innovation, in the companies taking on aspects of the food industry with new materials, with new approaches, with new science to make them carbon neutral. How do you see the potential impact of the really ambitious startups in decarbonizing the economy?
So, there is no doubt that every organization has to reduce its carbon footprint. But obviously, it's not going to be enough considering the size of the challenge we're facing with climate. We believe that it requires radical innovation. We are in the business of backing scientific teams that have IP, courage, and that have the ambition to transform an industry.
Give us some examples, concrete examples.
The airline industry is responsible for around 2% of green gas emission. The food industry is responsible for about a third of the green gas emission. We need to completely rethink our food value chain. First of all, because the global value chain has shown to be very fragile through the war in Ukraine, and move toward new solutions. Some of these new solutions are, for instance, what we call the fermentation farmer. So you produce protein locally that are healthy, affordable, and 100 times more sustainable. So to give you an order of magnitude, if in Germany we would introduce a speed limit on Autobahn, which is very controversial, we would save around 2 megatons of CO2 per year. One of our company alone, if they achieve their goals by producing a better form of cheese without the help of the cows, would save us 200 megatons.
Because cows emit methane and take a lot of land.
And not every single one of these companies will succeed. We've backed around 30 companies that have similar ambitions. The point being that we need to think in terms of complete transformation of certain industry. And we believe that the startups are a perfect vehicle.
But complete transformation often doesn't work in the time cycle of a VC fund. If you're going to create, hydrogen electric aviation, if you're going to create a new food system, that's not going to happen in 8 to 10 years. So where does VC fit in alongside not just the corporates, but also governments?
Well, the role of government is to define the field. I mean, what we have with CO2 is a massive externality, industrial externality, which today was free, and it's the role of the government to put the proper price on emitting CO2. By doing that, it would create the incentive and the business model for the startup that would in turn let more money flow into this domain. The good news is, in the last 6 months, as there are less money flowing into innovation, with only one exception, which is climate-related innovation. Because investors understand that putting money toward companies that will be long-term sustainable, provide solution to this climate crisis, is probably the biggest investment opportunity of our lifetime.
And the other thing that's happening is talent is choosing to give up a more conventional career to move towards doing something sustainable. I think Bloomberg ran a piece a few days ago talking about climate quitters, people who have given up the corporate role for a pay cut to do something more meaningful. Philipp, to what extent are you seeing people either choosing to leave Google to do their climate startup, or to want to work in a more sustainability-focused element of the company?
We've seen more people leave than over the last 20 years to go work on climate-related startups. But we have seen some, and they're very talented. But what we also have seen is people wanting to stay because they know that the company invests behind these initiatives and they want to go work on them, right? So if your company is not committed to this course, you will have a talent challenge. But if you are, then I think people may want to stay in companies that can clearly articulate how they want to get there and how they will scale their initiatives.
Last question for all of you, the biggest challenge you're facing taking us towards zero carbon? Is it a tech challenge? Is it a hiring challenge? Is it a regulatory challenge? Erin, what's the hardest thing?
What we need to overcome is to constantly stay focused and to pull in every opportunity with regards to the technologies that we see, and to really bring them in and make sure that they come into the implementations that they need to within the business units that they need to work with. We need to make sure that the business units do not lose track and that they have the resources to take these technologies in to make sure that the projects are successful. And then if we do that well, we will manage.
Christophe, is the challenge that the startup founders aren't thinking radical enough, or is there something else that's the barrier?
No, the challenge is more on a societal level to understand that behavioral change is not going to be enough. And there needs to be massive amount of energy, of political capital, of capital invested in backing radical initiatives that will make a difference.
Last word, Philipp.
I think ultimately we can only solve sustainability together. No single company can solve it. And so biggest challenge in my mind is finding the partnerships between companies and governments, and ultimately in our case with consumer products users, finding that intersection between the products and the partnerships that makes it work, because literally no company can do it alone.
Well, let's hope this happens quickly, because we're used to being in Munich in a snowy January, and it's not been very snowy lately. Thank you, Philipp Justus of Google, Erin Beilharz of Lufthansa Group, and Christophe Maire of Atlantic Labs.